We will call the meeting to order at 7 o'clock. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, we have a visit from the coalition tonight. You're right out of the chute.
All right, yeah, Shane from the coalition is here to make the annual visit. I'm going to get the PowerPoint up here. Everybody can see that?
Yeah. Should I just say next slide when it's ready to go?
Yo, or something, yep.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you. And again, my name is Shane Zart. I'm with the firm Flaherty and Hood, and I'll give a quick introduction because I know while we were talking to Clinton before the meeting started here, but I think it's been a few years since we've been out here in person. We were trying to remember last time we did this visit and actually stood here in the council chambers with you, and the best we could remember was at least pre-COVID. And I know we've got some new faces on the council as well since our last visit, certainly too. So, and we can go next slide for this part here. But Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities is a membership organization of more than 100 cities across the state. Represent the common interests of all these cities from a Greater Minnesota perspective at the Capitol in 5 key areas at the legislature, and then a 6th that's up there. But those are LGA and property taxes, usually our A number 1, environment and energy, economic development, transportation, annexation and land use, and then that final one there, labor and employment, provide a lot of services information to our members on emerging labor and employment issues within cities, and a lot of services there. So not necessarily a legislative area of focus typically, but is another kind of benefit area for our members that we provide. So what we try to do in these visits, and I'll go through this slide in a second, but I'll give some context first. Usually try to get out to as many of our member cities as we can each summer after we've wrapped up a legislative session, talk about the session that was, some of the blow-by-blow, what was easy, what was not easy, what passed, what didn't. A lot of the things we're happy or often unhappy about. But in a lot of these key areas that we talked about on the previous slide. Now, up here are some of our big priorities, and I'll be honest with you guys, too. When we recap a legislative session like this, or, as you guys know, a lot of things happened. A lot passed. The DFL had control of both chambers and the governor's office, and a lot of legislation passed. Even the things that only apply to our cities or that benefit our cities or impose new requirements on our cities, if we wanted to recap all of that, we tried to do an abridged version of this. One of my colleagues tried to walk through it, and it took us 50 minutes to do that. So we pared it down as much as we can, but what that means is we're not going to get to every issue that impacts you guys or that might be a priority of yours. So I'm going to run through a lot of the big ones here, but even some of the ones on this slide we won't get to in too much depth. So I'll note the ones we will, and maybe we kind of note the ones that we won't talk about, and we can answer any questions about those in depth as we go forward. So LGA we will talk about. So our goal going into this session was $150 million LGA increase. It's a big, bold ask, but LGA hadn't been increased also since pre-pandemic, so we'll talk more about that. A bonding bill that included significant investments in key areas that benefit Greater Minnesota, infrastructure and key issues and development such as childcare, housing. Lead line inventory and replacement we'll talk about a little bit on one of our slides, since that is kind of a new issue area for us. Permanent ongoing funding for city streets of all sizes. I see Clinton nodding his head because he's been a leader on that in that discussion for some years. We don't have a slide on that, and what I'll note there, and I've told Clinton this beforehand, is the big news. The headline is, historically cities with populations under 5,000 haven't gotten any ongoing dedicated funding for your roads. When you fill up at the pump, you pay your gas tax, you renew your tab fee, or you renew your tabs, and you pay your tab fees. None of those dollars have gone to cities under 5,000, and that's been for decades. And we can get into the reasons for it, or theories and gripes and all that if we want to. But the big news this year is that the legislature finally took steps to make this right. Some of the new funding that they're raising through the transportation bill this year will be dedicated to cities under 5,000 in an ongoing, dedicated way. And the thing to note there is we're still waiting for some official estimates from MnDOT, exactly what that'll mean for smaller cities going forward. One of the challenges for them, I think, in estimating it, is that there's a little bit of a phase-in. Some of the new funding sources that will feed into the dollars that small cities see are going to be things that are implemented in the coming year. So the early estimates, at least that were being passed around when they passed this at the legislature, there may not be that much money to go around the first year, but that second year, what they were estimating was at least $20 million will be spread across small cities under 5,000 statewide, and then it'll grow from there. So, $20 million is a lot of money. But as we were talking about, or as we've talked about a number of times and before the meeting too, that gets divided at least about 705 ways. 705 of the cities or so in Minnesota are under that population threshold. So this is a big victory. It's about time that we get something dedicated for our streets, but there's still some questions that we need to answer, and we may have our work cut out for us in future years to make sure that funding continues and grows. So corridors of commerce reforms and funding.
Excuse me.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
That funding for streets, will that be for repairs and reconstruction along with new construction?
Anything.
A new development?
Anything, yep.
Yes.
Sidewalks, alleys, anything.
Yep, and maybe it's helpful to note, and because Clinton has some experience with the program, because it's running through the Small Cities Assistance Program, which the program has existed since about 2015. The trouble has been they've only ever funded it kind of with the dollars that are left on the bottom line at the end of the legislative session. So it hasn't had, even though the program has existed, there's a formula that distributes the dollars out to cities. The legislature just hasn't been able to get consistent ongoing funding into it. So 1 year, or one biennium, I should say, they were able to put $8 million and $8 million in each year of the state budget biennium, and then because they didn't pass a transportation bill that included the program the following year, dropped to zero. And another year they put $18 million was its high water mark, but that was 1 year only. They didn't come back and pass a supplemental transportation budget, so it dropped to zero. And so that's been the frustration. It's been something where even when they put dollars towards it, it's not something that you can plan on, that you can incorporate into your budgeting, into your capital improvement plans. That's what they tried to tackle and fix this year. And so it should be great news. And if it sounds like there are any question marks in my voice, it's just because we're still waiting on MnDOT to figure out what are the amounts going to be, what exactly are those things going to look like, and how quickly do they phase in. So I hope that's helpful context too. So corridors of commerce reforms and funding, I won't dwell on that for too long, other than to note that's been a program that has been very successful, was created in 2013, helped fund the expansion of Highway 14 in a couple different instances, between Owatonna and Dodge Center, some of the improvements between North Mankato and Nicollet historically, but has been a program that, because of some changes made to the selection process a few years back, was really disfavoring Greater Minnesota projects. So we're hopeful and optimistic, actually, that the changes made this year will be better for rural projects. We'll get it back on a track where projects like 14's in a good place, actually. We're going to hopefully cut another ribbon here between Nicollet and New Ulm in October. But a lot of those rural highway projects like that were being left behind by the current system, and we hope that we've corrected that in this year's bill. On the bottom of the slide there, child care economic development grants and community support programs, and Greater Minnesota Workforce Housing and Development Fund. So two issues that we could spend days talking about, but we'll get kind of the short shrift in this presentation. Just like I said, there's so much to talk about, but tackling two major issues that communities have identified for us over the years in terms of what's holding your communities back in terms of being able to attract and retain workforce and young families, some investment into state programs to help support that. So now we'll go to the next slide. So we're going to talk LGA and some of the big issues here, but this is kind of our funny way of contextualizing some of what went on this year. It was a big fight. You can see there, CGMC priorities, we put ourselves in there, DFL priorities, other interest group priorities, all fighting over a big pool of money, and what came out the other end, in a lot of categories, some pretty good outcomes. And now there may be things, I don't want to say that across the board. I'm mostly talking about on those CGMC priorities I mentioned previously. Because there may be things that happen this year we disagree with, that impose even new costs on cities, new burdens on cities, that you may personally not like. But because there was so much money sloshing around, and we'll go to the next slide here, when you've got buckets of money that are this big, that's the forecast from February that the state was budgeting with. You know, nearly $17.5 billion in the current biennium, and forecasted out to 22 or more in the coming biennium. This is what they were working with to spend. A lot of that money is one-time money, but when you've got that much money around, it's easy to put a little bit in a lot of buckets, and in large part, that's why some of the positive outcomes on some of the programs we'll talk about were able to happen, because they weren't without competition. And we'll go to the next slide here. But there were also challenges. We had a DFL trifecta, I should say, single-party control in either direction comes with its own opportunities and challenges. This year, this is volume and speed of legislation. That comes with any single-party control. It used to be that, and this is a frustration often of, I'm sure some of yours, of certainly ours, you'd fight everything out for about 5 months. It seems like everything would pass in the final few days. They'd hammer out some deals, and no one liked each other. And sometimes things fell on the floor and just didn't get done. This year, it was very different. You had single-party control, so they came in, and there was a set of things that they wanted to pass in January. And it seemed like it never slowed down from there. And so that was a kind of a new dynamic that we haven't seen in quite a while, or about 10 years since there was last single-party control. DFL majorities that were dominated by metro area members. That's been, again, another trend is that we've seen as the DFL, the composition of both the DFL House and the DFL Senate, more and more of the members making up those majorities are in or around the metro area, with some exceptions. Senator Frentz from the Mankato area to the west of here is one of them. Rochester, Moorhead, Duluth, St. Cloud area. Where we have Greater Minnesota DFL members, they're often coming from the regional centers. But, and we're going to talk about this at our summer conference coming up in just a few weeks here. We'll have more information on this. A lot different composition of even when we've seen 10 years ago when we had DFL control of the legislature. There were a lot more Greater Minnesota DFLers in that caucus bringing those perspectives. And no backstop for potentially harmful proposals. That's another thing that's just inherent to any single-party control. So we'll go next slide. This is where we'll dig into some of the specifics here. So we'll go next slide on the LGA here too. This is a little bit of a refresher. I mentioned the $150 million increase that we were asking for this year. Also, in kind of a continuation of a conversation that started last year, some updates to the LGA formula that ensure that the formula continues to work for Greater Minnesota cities. What we found in recent years is that a lot of our cities were kind of coming up to a point where you put more money in the LGA bucket, and those increases that you were seeing were kind of slowing down, I think is the best way to put it. So the new formula has gone in, addressed a lot of the stuff under the hood, set it up hopefully for the next 10 years. And our proposal included adding inflation population growth to the appropriation for LGA, so that we're not coming back to the legislature every single year saying put this much money in, so that there's some automatic adjustment in that too to help keep up with city costs. So we'll go next slide. So LGA, this is where I think there's a little bit of nuance in this. LGA has historically seen strong bipartisan support. And that's not to say that it didn't this year, but it faced a lot of competition. And we had a lot of even DFL members that wanted to invest in LGA. What the DFL House and Senate leaders agreed on was that they were going to spend about $3 billion in the tax bill. And $3 billion is a lot of money. But when you're also looking at child-dependent tax credits, Walz checks is at least what Governor Walz was calling them, but those direct rebates to taxpayers, public safety aid, housing aid, and that's not even a comprehensive list of the spending they wanted to do in just that bill. We had to fight to just maintain some room in there for LGA. And that brings us to our next slide. because we were frankly underwhelmed at the beginning of session with Governor Walz's proposal. I mentioned that the CGMC thought that 150 would be what an appropriate number would be to invest in the LGA program. Governor Walz, in his initial budget release, recommended 30. And we were not very happy with that. We called it disappointing, inadequate, all kinds of things. Governor Walz was not very happy with us when we put out that release and he announced his budget. It was the day before our legislative action day where he was scheduled to come talk to our members. So we thought, we didn't know if he was going to show up or not after this, but I actually initiated a very good conversation with him and his staff when they revised their budget recommendations later the following month. After the February forecast, they did increase from 30 to 40 their recommendation and said, you know what, we get it, we get where the cities are coming from, we think there's more room to go, and kind of take this as a show of good faith that they moved a little bit. But what was another, I think, headwind for LGA at the beginning of session was a lower than recommendation than we were hoping for. So let's get to the good stuff. This is just a little bit of highlighting some of our member advocacy throughout session, some of the hearings that we had on our LGA bills, a couple of our mayors there from City of Virginia and City of St. Joe, and then we'll go next slide because we want to get to the numbers, the good stuff. These are the overall proposals. So what CGMC, Governor, House, Senate, and the final outcome were. This is for the program at large, and I think maybe an interesting note, why is the second year higher in the CGMC and the House proposal? That's that inflationary increase that I had mentioned. The House took that idea and ran with it. They didn't do the full total amount that we wanted, but they liked that idea. All of these, I should say, agreed on the formula updates that were recommended. And so that was a kind of note of consensus from the start. And now let's get to the good stuff.
This is the good slide.
Yeah, there you go. I've been teasing the good stuff. This is what we're talking about. What does this mean for Janesville? And this is in also a handout that looks like this in your packets too, and I'm sure Clinton can share these slides if he hasn't already. But this is what each proposal, starting with current law, the CGMC's proposal, I'm happy to say, is the highest one on there. I guess I'm happy to say because it was our proposal. I wish, for your sake, the final outcome was the highest one on there. But you can see some of the difference, what this would have meant for the city of Janesville. So a fairly substantial increase this year. But we're going to be back. LGA is going to remain a top priority of the coalition's. Under the hood here, there's what the formula kind of calculates Janesville is what the formula calls it, or what the folks who calculate the formula call it, is unmet need. You know, what's the gap between what you're receiving in LGA and what the formula thinks you should get? And I looked at that this morning. You've got some runway. There's about 1.7 million, I think, is what it was if the formula was fully funded. So future increases, all that means is if the state puts more money into LGA in coming legislative sessions, you guys will continue to benefit. You'll continue to go up. That's, I think...
sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. I was just going to say, LGA is complicated, and I know it's a big topic, so Clinton, I'll leave it to you, actually, if you want to pause for questions now, or if we should save all of them to the end. And I might rush through some of the rest of it, because I want to keep you guys on track time-wise and everything, not steal the rest of your evening.
It's probably an 11% increase from last year's LGA. So that's good. Yeah, and what's not on here, that's a good point, Clinton, and I should clarify, last year's is not on this chart. The 2024 number is what you would have received under current law, or an estimate of that. So this is comparing 2024 old law, 2024 new law. I don't have up there what 2023 was. I don't have that off the top of my head, so there you go. So yeah, we can move on. So one of the other major dynamics this year was bonding. And we can keep going off the title slide there, but the bonding bill, you know, was a frustration of ours at the CGMC, frankly, for a couple years. There was no 2022 bonding bill. It's phrased that way on the slide because typically bonding bills, or the state passes large bonding bills in the even-numbered year of the biennium. That's not always the case, but the last one they had passed was in 2020. They didn't pass one in 21, and then they didn't pass one in 22. So there was a lot of pent-up needs.
in a lot of categories. And this year, like I said, single-party control, but bonding is where the minority caucus can often have a voice. So in order to pass state general obligation bonds, they need 60% majority of each body. So the 60% of the Senate, 60% of the House has to vote for a bonding bill. And these DFL majorities, especially in the Senate, pretty slim. So they can't get to 60% on their own. This was a dynamic throughout session. The DFL wanted to move a bonding bill early. The GOP, especially the Senate GOP, said, no, we're not putting up any votes for it, not without a couple of our own priorities. And toward the beginning of session, it was not without tax relief. Toward the end of session, another dynamic became not without tax relief and some aid funding for nursing homes, to go to nursing homes around the state that are struggling with budgetary concerns. And this slide details some of the back and forth. We don't need to get into all of it because I feel like I'm already taking up a lot of your time. But so we can go to the next slide. Because I think one of the things that we do want to focus on in a major dynamic of that back and forth was, I mentioned that you need to pass state general obligation bonds, what we typically refer to as a bonding bill, 60% of each caucus. Well, toward the end, the DFL said, fine. This wouldn't be the case every year, but this year when we've got this giant surplus of one-time money, we'll just pass a cash bill. We only need our own DFL votes, but that's going to mean we're going to pass it ourselves, and we're going to put in there the projects and the priorities that we think make sense, and kind of cast the GOP to the side. And that bill was a realistic threat, I think, that they would have passed that, and would have had serious consequences. These are just some of the priorities. You can see on the left is what some of the funding numbers were in the bonding bill. On the right is what some of those numbers were in the cash bill. Some of them are zeroed out on our Greater Minnesota priorities. Some of them are far, far less. And then that chart on the right, that bar graph, is the blue is the just geographic balance. So the blue is the share of each of those buckets that was going to the metro area versus Greater Minnesota. So you can see in the Parks and Trails case, and in the transportation case, the money in that cash bill were going over 90% in the Parks and Trails case and nearly 90% in the transportation case to the metro area. And then grants directly to nonprofits, roughly 80% or just under 80% of those were going to the metro area. So that was some of the political dynamics, the gamesmanship, and so we'll keep moving here. So, and this is just to kind of highlight some of our advocacy in the final days. With these dynamics back and forth, in the final week of session, the CGMC sent this letter basically saying, get back to the table. This bill that is on the table now, this cash bill, doesn't do anything for Greater Minnesota, shortchanges us in a bunch of different categories. We need leadership. We need you to come back to the table and get this thing done and pass the GO bill, whatever that takes. We joke, that's Minority Leader Mark Johnson on the left in the photo, and my colleague, former senator, but now works with us, Eric Simonson on the right. We like to joke that that's when the deal got done. I don't know what they were actually talking about, but we can move on. So at the end, we ended up with 3 separate bills. This is maybe the headline, ended up being the largest infrastructure package in Minnesota history, and that's because they did a little bit of both, frankly. They passed that original GO bonding bill, they passed a version of that cash bill, and then they passed a separate bill that included some of the nursing home funding that became part of that deal to get the job done. But you can see because they ended up passing all of those bills, a number of our Greater Minnesota priorities ended up receiving significant funding, including in the Public Facilities Authority. That's where a lot of water, wastewater dollars come through. BDPI is one of our DEED's economic development programs focused specifically on Greater Minnesota. You can see some of the others, including local roads and bridges there, got significant investments. So we can keep moving. But what finally got it together, I think you could probably draw some of these conclusions just from everything I've already said. But public pressure from us, we're not claiming all the credit, but I've never seen in my time doing, a lot of my colleagues haven't, as strong a reaction to something like our letter that we sent in the final week and some of the media attention around our efforts to push forward a bonding bill and urge folks to get back to the table, as I've seen on this. But a lot of that came from local governments that had mounting needs that were in touch with their legislators, the time since a bonding bill had passed, the credible threat of a bad alternative, that's that cash bill I talked about, and legislators willing to compromise at the end of the day is what ultimately got it done. So on the environment, there's a couple of positives here. One I mentioned at the beginning is money for lead line identification and replacement. Wanted to highlight this because it's a bit of a new issue for the CGMC to dive into, but what we're finding in more and more of our cities, and a lot of it depends on the age of your housing stock, obviously, is lead service lines running to houses, and this has become a federal priority. Massively expensive to tackle, even just to identify lead lines, let alone replace them. So what the state ended up doing is putting forward $240 million that will help. Part of it will go to cities to help identify an inventory where they might have lead lines. A chunk of that will actually be available to homeowners. The state will be covering the homeowner cost, so that the service line that runs to the house is often the homeowner's responsibility. There'll be grants available to help fund that. And the Department of Health will ultimately be administering, and along with PFA, both sides of this program, the inventory and the replacement program. So there's a lot more information to come there. And then PFA. This is kind of a headline dovetailing with the bonding discussion. Because that agreement came through in the manner it did, one of the things we want to highlight is historic investments, big numbers going into a number of water and wastewater programs that will ultimately flow through to cities and help cities with aging infrastructure, and provide through both grants and loans through the PFA. Now, we've talked about a couple of the good things. I think the next slide is one of the bad. So, or at least it nods toward the bad, because we've talked about the money that flowed through a lot of these programs. And because so much money is flowing around this year, like I said, we don't want to sound like it was all positive, because frankly, we spent a lot of time playing defense. When we talked about the PFA and how we're happy about all the money flowing through it, well, we can be happy about that because I think in 3 or 4 different instances, we were able to ally with some of the rural DFLers that we had, with some of the legislators and even GOP legislators and represent many of our cities, and often the governor's office, to really push back on proposals, largely coming from the DFL House Caucus, to change programs like the PFA programs in ways that would funnel a lot more money of that money to the metro area and away from greater Minnesota. Other proposals, the second bullet there nods towards some permitting changes that legislators wanted to impose statewide to make it much, much harder to do many kinds of economic development in greater Minnesota. Now, a version of that passed, but because of the work we were able to do, 2 things were significantly narrowed. One is the number and types of permits it applies to, and then 2 was geographically. Where originally some of these new permitting requirements would have applied statewide, the final version was limited to the 7-county metro area and the cities of Duluth and Rochester, so the metro plus cities of the first class in greater Minnesota. But I don't think that's the end of the story on some of these. The final bullet there is, in a lot of these changes, not much consideration was given along the way as to how some of them would affect greater Minnesota relative to the metro area. And we kind of have that looking ahead thing there because, you know what, we've passed a budget this year. We've got a whole nother year in this legislative biennium. They're going to come back. A lot of the same sets of players who thought these were good ideas to begin with, we don't think they're done looking at them. And so we're going to have to keep telling that story about how some of these programs, even if a lot of them are well-intended, we need to be able to consider, as we're legislating, how these things will impact some of our greater Minnesota cities as well. So we'll continue going. Looking ahead, so 2024 legislative session, it's the traditional year for a bonding bill. Like I said, there's usually passed in the even-numbered year of the biennium. Because we did one this year, but it was kind of a catch-up for not having done one for 2 years, We could see another large bonding bill, and there's some will among legislators to do that. Constitutional amendments. We think we'll see a lot of discussion about those. In fact, I think some of the DFL leadership at the end of this session referred to a couple. They might want to do some that relate to some of the Environmental Trust Fund expiring. There's a push in the House DFL caucus, I think, to put reproductive rights on the ballot in some way, potentially through a constitutional amendment. Surplus spending, there's a big question mark on that, because believe it or not, with all the money we spent at the state level this year, they still left some money on the bottom line. So there's a lot yet to play out in terms of everything they passed. Will we have a surplus? How much of that is just one-time money? Fix-it items from the 2023 session. When you move this much legislation this fast, sometimes there's some T's that need to be crossed and I's dotted, and you might have to fix some things. There was one in the news this week, a typo in the tax bill that a couple years down the line could cost some people some additional money when they're filing, and on the individual income tax side, so they better fix that. Traditional year for policy. Now that we've passed the budget, year two is the year for policy, and the fund starts on February 12th, 2024. Is the session start date next year. We note that there's an election year in all these categories, because that always just adds to the politics of any session, and then we can move on. Clinton, I think I'm just about done talking, is some of our upcoming events. So our summer conference, I mentioned, is just a couple weeks away. We'll have a lot more of this. We'll have some of the legislators joining us. That's in Thief River Falls this year. This is our summer conference always rotates north and south, so we've done it as close to you guys as Mankato. Thief River has to be one of the further ones we've done from you guys, but that's where I apply a little guilt. I say when we've held it in southern Minnesota, the folks from Ely and Roseau have driven down, so head on up and do it when they're hosting it. But our fall conference will be in Wilmer, and our next summer's conference will be back on the southern end of the state, so likely Wilmer included and the next summer's conference, both likely within at least a 2-hour drive of you, or just about. Yep. So Legislative Action Day, if you want to note that, we've got set for next March 20th. That's when all of you can come to the Capitol and lobby with us on some of these issues, and that's all I've got. So thanks for giving me so much time here, and like I said, there's a lot to run through. I hope it was informative, and I'm happy to stand here and answer any questions, even if they're pointy ones.
So like the public safety, what would you call that?
Public safety aid?
Yep. That's something that, obviously that's a one-time deal. Not gonna probably plan on that anytime soon again, or like what was there, where'd that come from?
You know, that came from, and that passed during this year's session. There was a similar proposal that Governor Walz brought forward in the previous session as well that didn't get across the finish line. I think, where it came from was Governor Walz and legislators from both parties, a little bit frankly, saying the state's sitting on a big chunk of money right now. We know that there are public safety needs across the state. They're hearing about things like officer retention in almost every category. Departments have aging equipment, all that stuff. So I think it was kind of a good faith effort on their part to say, what can we do that's positive in the public safety space with this extra money? But it was structured as a one-time thing. And there was some back and forth at the legislature about who should get it, how should we dole it out. What we ended up with was $300 million one time into that bucket. We've got a little handout in the materials I sent in advance and should be in your packets. They're just kind of some of the uses, what it can be used for, what it can't be used for, and maybe you've had some discussions already as a council about where you might allocate that. What my answer to you is I think you're right. I wouldn't count on it more than just this once, but if it's something that your city finds value in, and if it's something that you would like to see maybe established as an ongoing program, or something that the legislature at least has at its disposal year to year to consider throwing extra dollars in, I would say bringing it up to me right now is a good start. It's often how we learn what our cities, even things like this, that was not a CGMC priority. It was something that the legislature, the governor brought forward. We're happy to see it passed. Of course, one of the things that we're always cognizant of is, LGA is often our number one priority, because those are the most flexible, beneficial, ongoing dollars that we can get to our cities. But, we're happy to see dollars like this flow to our cities as well. So, if that's something that you find value in and would like to see continue, I'd say keep bringing it up to me, keep bringing it up to your legislators, and, we can kind of talk about ways to make that a priority going forward, and others too. But bug the League of Minnesota Cities, anyone you can talk to about any of this stuff that you find valuable, because it is, sometimes it's more art than science, but the squeaky wheel does get the grease sometimes too. It's a good way, talking about it is a good way to just let folks know what you found valuable that came out of any session, frankly. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions? As always, thank you very much for stopping down here tonight.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Well, and thank you for having me, and we'll try to
Great
make it a regular
presentation.
thing. Yeah, now that we're getting out, and we're, like I said, it was pre-pandemic, I think was the last time we were here in person, and then we were out doing visits in person last summer too, and I think, but didn't get to Janesville as far as I know. So we'll get back to making it an every year thing, and we'll come down and see you. I'd love to learn more about what you guys have going on in your community too. So, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Shane. Have a good night.
Is there any changes or additions to the agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Consent agenda?
Okay, attached are the minutes from our last meeting, and then we have the receivables and payables. Just point out a couple payables to you. There's a few invoices in there for payment for the training that Jim and I went to for the League of Minnesota Cities. And then, I think it's on the last page of the payables, we do have our CIP, capital improvement work. There is an invoice in there for some of that work this year. And there will be more work done tomorrow on a couple of the other streets. And I will note that we have not received our first half local government aid yet. We probably will in the next couple weeks. Any questions? Andrea, do you have anything?
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstaining, so I wasn't at the last meeting.
401. Public forum? Public forum, public forum. Notice and communications.
I do not have any for you tonight.
Council reports?
Ken, sure.
On the personnel committee, we're doing some interviews tomorrow for some stuff for PD, and we're gonna talk to a candidate about the, community development director position.
On the utility side, we had a meeting earlier this evening. There's nothing real new, it's a lot of updates. We're still waiting on our stuff for the AMI electrical meters. We've had a few applicants for the lineman position. A lot of it is, a lot of the long-term stuff we're planning, we're just slowly moving forward with. And we took our first look at the water budget for next year. Is there any questions on utility stuff? Andrea's right down there. Administrator report.
Can we do department head reports first? So,
We sure can.
just so you don't
Think
have
they
to
wanna get
sit
out of here?
any longer.
I guess Pete's going first.
Thanks, Glenn.
Yeah, go ahead.
Pete Mattel, Administrator at the nursing home. Just quick update, where if you drove by over the weekend, for the first time since 2019, we had our family picnic, which was great. We had the turtle races and the kitty carnival again in June. So that was all, we couldn't do any of that because of COVID, even though it went away a long time ago. According to the federal government, it was still a real live active thing into the middle part of May. So since that went away, we're kind of back to normal. We don't have to wear masks all the time. Visitors don't have to wear masks, so it's feeling a little bit more like it used to be. It's still kind of strange. Some days I leave my office and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't have a mask on. Can I be out in the hallways? So we're all going through that a little bit. To piggyback a little bit on what our previous speaker said, we did get a chunk of money this year for nursing homes. It was a strange session. They didn't talk about us at all throughout the session. No subcommittees, no committees, nothing talking about nursing homes. And then, at the last minute, a group of Republicans on the House side said, well, we're not voting for a bonding bill if you don't give money to nursing homes. So all of a sudden, out of the blue, they found $300 million to give to nursing homes. It comes in a couple different ways. So we have a short-term increase to our rates. Now, government will tell you that's government giving us more money. Keep in mind, if you're a private pay person in the nursing home, you're paying that extra. Everybody has to pay an extra $12.35 a day for the next 18 months. If you're on medical assistance, then it's the state paying, but if you're private pay, it's coming out of the individual's pocket. That's on top of a big increase we had the first of the year, so if you see private pay people and they're not too happy with me, you'll understand why. It's a big number they've had to foot. But that's a good chunk of money for us. I mean, over the next 18 months between private pay and state money, that's about $150,000. There is also one-time payments, a big one-time chunk that we're gonna get in this August and next August. Our share of that's gonna be about $380,000. So we'll get a $180,000 check here in the next month. And that's specifically earmarked towards either mortgage, debt reduction, debt payments, or capital improvements. In our case, we did a big remodeling shortly before COVID hit, so we can use that money to pay down that debt. Or we can say, oh, that debt isn't that high of an interest rate, we'll go ahead and keep it, but we'll use the money to fix other things if so needed. There's no big time frame on that, so it doesn't have to be done right when we get the check. So that's something the nursing home board and I will work on. The last chunk of money we get is a grant program that the state's gonna have. So if we say, hey, we want to give all of our staff that stuck with us throughout of COVID a one-time bonus, incentive pay since we're a city.
Exactly.
That we can apply. We don't know how yet, because that hasn't come out, but it's something we'll apply to Department of Human Services, say, here's what we'd like to do, here's the amount of money we'd like to do, and then they will either give us a yea or nay. Pretty much everybody who applies will get something, and I've heard it'll be in the range of $2,000 to $3,000 an employee is kind of about what we'll end up getting.
That'd be great.
Yeah, that would certainly be helpful.
That'd be great.
Yep. So those things certainly have helped shore up the industry a little bit. If you've read the newspapers, it's an industry that is not the healthiest industry at this point in time, so this will go a long ways to help. In our case, you know, we didn't have a terrible year last year. This year we're right around to break even, but we've recently hired a handful of people, so our census is up about 5 over where it was a couple months ago. And at the amount of money we now charge people, that's a big number. So over the summer, I think we'll have a pretty solid-looking financial statement. And I think I might have mentioned, might not the last time I was here, we did apply for the employee retention credit, which was kind of like a PPP loan. Haven't seen anything on that yet, but if it's all approved, that's like in the $600,000 range. So with that, the changes that have been made, the money we have in the bank, certainly makes our balance sheet look a whole lot healthier. But the big question is, I know I bore all my boards together when I say this, is tell me what my staffing's gonna be for the next year, and I'll tell you how your building's gonna do. Again, right now, we're able to take a couple extra people because our staffing isn't too bad today. But we have 3 people all of a sudden decide to turn in notices in a month, and the whole thing falls apart, and we're scrambling. So it's just, I mean, everybody knows this, the labor market's just incredibly tight right now, and always been that way in healthcare and nursing homes to begin with, and so it's just kinda a double whammy for us. But we're getting through it, you know. Sitting around complaining doesn't do any good, so we try to make it work as best we can. Questions?
So the staffing has kinda came around a little bit?
It's been a little bit better. Yeah, we've hired like 3 or 4, nursing assistants recently. We're doing something with our dietary program, working with an outside vendor there to help bring some more education, training, experience to our dietary program, so we're hoping that'll help us shore that end up well. We recently had to change therapy providers, but the change has been real good. And that change was driven because our previous therapy provider, and that's an outside company we'd hire, they couldn't get staff. So we went with this group, and they seem to be doing a much better job, and we seem to be happier with the job they're doing than our previous one was too, so it's kind of been good in 2 ways. So yeah, we just kinda keep plugging away every day, and if you know of anybody looking for a job, you know where to send them. And it's a great job, I truly, if you're gonna work in this industry, working for a nursing home like ours, to me, is just such a no-brainer. You get PERA, we pay a nice chunk of health insurance and a very competitive wage. So, you know, come work for us, stick here for 20, 30 years, and when you retire, you know, you're in a real good position at that point in time. So, when we can get people to listen to that message, we can usually get them to sign on. But young people don't care about that too much.
Any other questions for Pete?
Nope, just thank you.
Thank you.
Doing a nice
Thanks,
job.
Pete.
You've got a good reputation in that house, and so that goes a long way.
We have a really good staff. We really do. I mean, there's a lot of longtime people there who treat that like it's one of their families. So, yeah, that nursing home's always had a real strong reputation, and
Yep.
I'd like to take credit for it, but I'm afraid I can't. It's the staff you have and the
Takes a
people.
village.
It's true. I like to maybe have a little piece, but, yeah, we've got a real good group there.
Definitely.
All right? Thank you.
Pete. Yes,
Yep, have a good rest of your meeting.
yep, have a good evening.
Jake?
Well, it's kind of just business as usual out there. It's super busy. Every day seems to be busy. Lots of events going on right now. But everything seems to be going as planned. I'm sure you guys had a chance to look at it. The revenues are up approximately 14,000. Expenditures are up as well, but I don't have an exact number for you tonight. Like I said, it's super busy. Seems to be consistently busy all season long. We've got another food truck and live music event coming this Friday, the 14th. Street Food Delights and In a Bind will be out. We have another one scheduled for August 4th. We seem to be quite successful. The first one was very successful, so. As far as the grounds go, several minor projects we're working on. With the help from JAGA, we were able to purchase sand for all of our bunkers. We put like 30 tons of sand into all the bunkers, which is big news for us. I've never done that working out there, so 10, 15 years we've never properly done it, so it's a big improvement for us. Doing our best to keep the place green, obviously in the midst of the drought challenge, but I'm happy with where we're at. hopefully we get some rain soon.
Doesn't look good.
It's supposed to be raining now.
I know.
No?
That's about all I got. I mean, it's...
Okay, thank you very much, yeah.
Any questions?
That Workman, did you ever get rid of that old one?
Haven't done anything with it yet.
With the new
We can-
ones?
We can, I guess I'd love it if we just keep it a little longer. The new one, we've gotta modify the ball picker
Sure.
attachment. It's not that hard, it's just not something I've done yet.
Mm.
I will note, I mean, we're using both of them a lot.
Okay,
So-
I was just curious.
Are you still selling memberships?
Yeah, I tried to get in touch with Scott before he left. He had to leave town for some family, matters, so I don't have a number for you. But as far
But
as
the
I know,
membership
it's...
continues
Yep,
to
they do.
increase.
I would say, yeah, it'll probably fizzle out now, given, you know, all the kids from summer and, you know, you'll get those early summer, but I would imagine at this point, we know kinda where that number is gonna be, within a few anyways. Unfortunately, I don't have that
Yeah,
tonight,
it's-
but it's going well. It's busy. Every day of the week, every time of the day, there's people out there, so it's, yeah, all is well.
Ivan, just, based on the year-to-date revenues, they budgeted 102 for memberships, and right now they're at 97.5, so. They're pretty close to meeting their budget number.
What were they at last year? You know?
Probably, do you have that?
Yeah,
It's not important that I have it tonight.
they were about just shy of 20 over.
Just what?
Shy of 20 over budget. They
What
budgeted
what was
90,000.
budget? No,
Budgeted 90,000 last
so
year.
they had 110
They had
last year.
109.
You probably know better than I do. Do they still come in this time of year?
We do, but it's Wednesdays and Tuesdays.
Yeah.
Right.
Here and there.
Substantially, I would say.
There's a couple today, I think,
Done, but
if I remember, wasn't it, or was that the other, that Friday
Yeah,
name?
all good?
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you guys.
Thanks, Jacob.
Thanks, Jake.
And now we'll circle back to the administrative report for Clinton.
Yeah. In tonight's report is the June statement from the bank, the reconciliation. We also have the cash balance as of last Friday with the graphs. You have the, numbers from the golf course. The Housing Institute workshop, the final one, is this week, so Andy and I and a few others, a couple others will be in Rochester, Wednesday and Thursday. And I just want you to know that at our next council meeting, the auditors will be here to present the 2022 annual audit report. And one other item for you is that, I just got an email this morning that the walking path towards Lakeview Park, they are gonna begin that next week, that project. And with the compensation study, the council approved everything last meeting. There were no appeals, or there were no questions from anybody, so effective July 1st, it all went into place. And Andy, you were not here last meeting, so somebody else had to make a motion to approve that report, hint, hint.
We sat here for about 15 minutes,
Oh,
and
yeah,
nobody
right.
knew what to do.
Yeah? I have one question.
Yep.
Safe routes.
Yes, plans were submitted, and I guess I touched base with Femrite last Friday, and I had not heard back from them yet, so,
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah.
Haven't heard about it for
yep.
a little bit. Motion to approve administrative report.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Okay.
No.
Aye.
Yeah,
Old business number one is the Teal Street project, the county project.
Yes, let me grab that here quick. So next week, they will begin the Teal Street project. It's gonna take about 3 weeks. We did find out the other day that the railroad is gonna require, traffic control, or as I'm gonna say, this might not be the appropriate term, but they need a flag man.
Flag person?
Yeah, flag person, thank you. So that will add on to the cost a little bit, 'cause it was not in the original bid, but it's, Jim at the county explained to me it's probably $1,200 or $1,300 on our end, which we have that money in the rescue plan fund is where we're gonna use that money. So that project will start on Monday, and it should be 3 weeks.